Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the YouTube channel grecochess, the channel of the game of chess. In this video, the second round of the QCC Winter Swiss Tournament. This is the chess tournament organized by the Queen's Chess Club, taking place at Floral Park, New York. This is a little town in Nassau County in the middle of Long Island. But before I show you the game, let's first look at the details of the tournament. We're going to the web page of the QCC of the Queen's Chess Club, and here we are. The QCC Winter Swiss Tournament takes place in 5 consecutive Fridays. Friday 20th was a week ago, round number 1. I lost from Vladimir Polyakin with a rating of 2100. Round number 2 was yesterday, and there are going to be 3 more rounds in March 6th, 13th, and 20th. And what are the time controls? This is important. G90 D5, which means that when the game starts, players have 90 minutes on their clocks, 1.5 hours. And when it's, of course, your opponent's turn to move, your clock does not move. And when it's your turn to play, then for the first 5 seconds, the clock does not move. This is a so-called delay, the D5. And after that, it continues going downwards from where it stopped before. And you need to complete all of your moves before the clock shows 0. Because once it is so 0, no matter how great your position, you're timed out. And you lose the game unless there are some very special cases where you can claim a draw, meaning cases where your opponent cannot checkmate no matter what. But let's see who was the opponent. My opponent yesterday in round number 2. His name is John Thomas Flippen. His rating is 863. And compare it with my rating. We're soon going to give a look. And my rating is 1631, meaning my opponent had almost half of my rating. So clearly I was the favorite, but as we know, this doesn't mean too much. I've lost from a player that had rating less than 600. I've defeated players with 2000, so who knows what. Let's see what happened. And we are going to proceed the standard way. We're going to the analysis board of chess.com. And what I'm going to do now is chess engines are disabled while you're playing games. I hope the engines are not disabled. What I'm going to do is I have in my hands this score sheet, and I'm going to enter the moves one by one. And assuming the computer is working, we'll see if it's working or not. It is going to give an evaluation, a numerical one. Positive number means white is doing better. Negative number means that black is doing better. We'll make a comment on the move, anything from brilliant with 2 exclamation points to blunder with 2 question marks. We'll show which move would have been the best and what are the 5 top options, the 5 best moves for the other player whose turn is to come. And first of all, can we disable the message itself? Okay. And let's hope things will go okay. And John had the white pieces, I had the black, so John starts with pawn going to d4. And this is a book move. You see this little booklet here. It means that this move is well known in opening theory, has been discussed, analyzed extensively. And as you know, the most popular first move for white, or one of the most popular, is pawn going to e4. And then you have the English opening, pawn to c4, or the ready, pawn going to f3. And sometimes you may want to surprise your opponent with pawn going to b3. Or you may want, what else can you do? There are plenty of other things to do. The pawns can go to d3 or e3 and so on. But I had to face that move. Pawn to d4. And how do I reply? Usually black replies with the king's Indian defense with knight going to f6. But almost equally popular, perhaps the second most popular, is what I played. Pawn goes to d5, the symmetric. Why did I choose this? Because I know it better than the other one. In the opening, it's not only which opening is best and the differences are extremely small, but which one you know better and you feel most comfortable with. And then the second move for white is when pawn goes to c4. And this is the so-called Queen's Gambit. It's called Gambit because black has the option to win the pawn at c4. Usually they cannot keep it for too long. That's why if you want to take the pawn on c4, don't try to keep it because before you know it, you are destroyed. And I decided to react in almost symmetric way. Pawn goes to c6. This is also a book move. This is called the Slav defense. You see here the names of the openings as after every move we play. Why this move? The most popular one is, I need to tell you, pawn goes to e6. But the problem with that is that you block your bishop on c8. But even with that, my bishop eventually will be blocked. Next move. John places his knight to c3. Another book move. And I develop my other knight. Our goals are to develop the knights and control as many central squares in as many times as possible. Next move, John develops his other knight going to f3. And now I need to block my bishop on c8. What options do I have? You see, the top answer for the move is pawn to e6. Otherwise, the second is I can take the pawn, but be very careful. I double my pawns and better not try to keep it. Play pawn to g6, perhaps. You see here the third one is to start a fianchetto. Bishop from f8 will go to g7. Pawn to a6 maybe, pawn to h6, other options, but I played what the computer thinks is the best. Pawn to e6, but unfortunately it blocks the c8 bishop. Next one, John places his pawn to e3, the top move of the computer, and I send my bishop and develop my f8 bishop to e7. We completed 5 moves, all of them are book moves until now. John is ahead a little bit by 0.44, but so long as we play book moves, this means almost nothing. Let's continue. John sends his bishop to d3 to develop it, and then now that John has wasted the move to develop the bishop, now I'm taking the pawn. The idea is that John will take it back, but will need 2 moves to do it instead of 1. This is a very, very small advantage, but anything you can get is wonderful. I take it, he takes it, and now both help my c8 bishop develop on the other diagonal and also win a tempo by attacking white's bishop. My pawn goes to b5. Of course, John will save his bishop to d3. And time for me to castle. Computer would rather have my bishop go from c8 to b7, but I wanted to keep this option later on. Now time for castling. Computer says it's excellent. Until now we had book moves. Look at that. Until now, every move was book move, and now my move, although excellent, computer would rather have my pawn go to b4 and attack the knight, but I was afraid pushing the pawns too much for the just one move attack was not the safest option. Castling for me, castling for John now. And my bishop goes to b7. Now I fianchetto my bishop, my light color bishop, is on the long diagonal that goes from a8 to h1. That's the best place for the bishop, and it would be even better, of course, if this diagonal was empty, but too early yet. And now, John's next move, he wants to gain more space and place the pawn to b4, but there is one little problem. You see why it's a mistake. The moment I saw it, I had to calculate again and again, make sure it's not a trap, because I have a free pawn. And after the 10 moves, thanks to this free pawn, I'm ahead by 0.64. But the game is not over. Let's continue. Not only I'm winning the pawn on the b4, I'm also attacking the knight on c3. Next move, John will place his bishop to b2 to defend his knight on c3. And now, what should I do? I played a move that's not in the top 5. There isn't a play. I'm going to explain. I'm going to explain my thoughts, whether they are correct or not. Since I'm ahead, I want to exchange, hopefully reaching an ending where I'm a pawn ahead. And also the knight on c3 controls two great squares on d5 and d4. And the bishop on c3, and let's get rid of it. Once it goes there, it's blocked by its pawn on d4. So I decided, let's take the knights. In knight resistance the computer. Bishop takes back. Surprise, surprise. Now what I'm afraid? I'm afraid of a Greek gift. Not yet, because my knight on f6 will not allow the queen to go to h5. That's better finish early and also give some love to my king in case I need it later. Pawn goes to h6. Queen to d2 for John protects the bishop on c3. And my knight goes to d7. Develop my knight, my b8 knight. And John attacks my queen, bishop to a5. So I have to do something to defend my queen. And what can I do? Of course, I can put my knight on b6, but my knight is pinned. I don't want my pieces to be pinned. I want to have as much freedom as possible. Pin only if necessary. But where to move the queen? It has a lot of squares can go. b8, c8, e8, e7. I decided that of all the squares to send it to c8. Protect as much as possible. My knight on d7, my bishop on b7, my pawn on c6. And the next move. And John will place his rook to c1 facing my queen. And now, what do I want to do? I want to be able to liberate my bishop on b7, but the only way to do it is if I move my pawn from c6 to c5. But if I do so immediately, I lose my b5 pawn. I don't want to lose it. And in order to have the option for the future to move my pawn to c5 without losing a pawn, I move my pawn to a6, which the computer thought was the best move. Oh, excellent. And we reach now 15 moves, and what is the score? John is ahead by 0.07. Let's continue. John also activates his other rook, goes to b1. My rook goes to e8. To be it still is a close file, the e file, but has a little bit more space on e8. John sends his pawn to h3 to stop my knight from dreaming to go to g4. And now what I see is the following. I see, yes, I have an extra pawn, but I have less space. Look at that. None of my pieces is on John's half the board. The most advanced piece pawn I have, or piece of pawn, is the one on b5. John on the other side has a bishop on a5, which is on my half the board. He has a pawn on d4, and rooks with open, not open files, but semi-open files. His two rooks are on semi-open files, while mine are in closed files. Bishops that have quite a lot of squares where they can go, while my bishop, one of my bishops, the only one I have is on b7. It can go nowhere. So I felt that, and look at that. Although I'm an extra pawn, I'm barely ahead by 0.24. That's why I believe that I needed more space. How can I get more space? Let's start exchanging, especially when you're constrained in space, exchange. When you're ahead in material, exchange. And that's why I started a series of exchanges with pushing my pawn to e5. And computer thinks the best move. But now the exchanges are starting. Pawn goes to e5. My knight goes to e5. Johnson takes my knight on e5 and I take his knight with my rook on e5. And now John attacks my rook by sending the bishop to c3. And my rook has to go somewhere. If I leave it here, I lose the entire rook. If I defend it, I lose exchange. Where to go? Computer has a great idea. Well, say danger level. You see, the best move is knight go to e4, attack the queen, so he cannot take my rook. And after the queen is saved, I win the bishop. So no attack. Of course, the queen could attack, but it's much easier to defend the rook when attacked by a queen, because if I send a piece to defend it, queen would not take my rook and get lost. Now. But what I wanted to do is pin white's bishop. My rook goes to d5. The third best move according to the computer. And now it says it's an inaccuracy. We completed 20 moves at a time, and after this inaccuracy, John is ahead by 0.34. Imagine playing with a player that has half my rating, or for John facing an opponent twice his rating, and after 20 moves, he's ahead by 0.34. Even though he's a pawn down, still materially, I'm a pawn up, but the overall position seems to favor black. Let's continue. And John sacrifices his bishop and loses the two bishop advantage, but look what he gets in exchange. He takes my knight on f6, and I have to take back with my pawn. And now the g file leading to my king is open. Was a pawn worthwhile for that or not? John attacks my rook by sending the pawn to e4. And I continue pinning his bishop by sending my rook to d4. Still, the d3, the bishop at d3 is pinned. And John decides to take my pawn on h6, sacrifices his bishop. Why? Because it's too tempting. After I take the bishop, he'll take my... Look what's going to happen. In fact, you'll see it as it happens. No. Sorry, line. After he takes the pawn, I take the bishop. If I decide to take it, then he takes the pawn on f6. So he sacrificed his bishop for 2 pawns, and he has a very, very dangerous attack with at least a perpetual for minimum, and if he can activate his rooks, I can have more material and still be checkmated. That was George's decision, and I can't blame him for that. Takes the pawn on h6, but computer thinks it is a blunder. Why? Because computer values the lost bishop too much. And so I'm ahead by 1.49. Still, it does not win yet again, but it is important. I take the bishop. What else can I do? The only move that gives me ahead. Otherwise, I lost just a pawn. And of course, John takes the next pawn on f6. Great moves in the computer. I wouldn't call great moves a move that are obvious. For a move to be great, at least that's my perspective, it has to be a move that it's not easily found. Yes, it's great for you, but it's not easy to find. And John will take the pawn on f6, for surprise, surprise. And my king is exposed. I have an extra bishop. In fact, the bishop for a pawn to be exact, yes. John has 5 pawns, I have 4, I have the extra bishop, but look what bishop is my extra. It's the one on b7, that can go nowhere. Well, John has open line towards my king. Let's see what will happen now. My queen goes to e6. If I could only exchange queens, life would be wonderful. Because then I can start liberating my bishop, and my extra bishop will decide the game, hopefully. And John, of course, is not going to exchange. Queen goes to g5. Check. Best as a computer. And I want to exchange queens, and I place my queen on g6. I attack John's queen. Computer thinks the best. We finished 25 moves, and now I am ahead by 2.27. And at this point, John started thinking and thinking and thinking for quite a long time. And I was thinking, where can he place his queen if he doesn't want to exchange it, he doesn't want to lose it? The best square for John, the way I saw it then, please disregard what you see here, but the way I saw it is if he puts his queen on e7, attacks my bishop on b7, what can I do? If I place my bishop on c8, his rook goes on c6, attacks my queen, wins a pawn, attacks my queen, and I'll have to think very seriously how to proceed. And I was thinking all these possibilities, and I really believed I was in danger, even though the computer has it only the fourth best move here. It does not even want the rook to take on c6, wants the king to go to f1. If the queen was in 7, my queen could not even take the pawn on f4. I don't know what I would do had he gone that route. But after a lot of effort, while I was thinking all these possibilities, how to proceed after queen to e7, because the other moves I didn't feel too threatened up from them. With a huge relief, I saw that John played the move that the computer thinks the best. Queen takes g6 check. And here I didn't even need too much time to think. Pawn takes the queen. Rook goes to c5. Now John activates the rooks, but without the queens, things are not so easy for John. I cannot blunder my queen any longer. I am ahead a piece for a pawn. Still, I need to be careful. My rook goes to d8. I want, if possible, exchange a pair of rooks. Now, I definitely want to exchange. His rook goes to b2 to protect the pawn on a2 because I was thinking things like attacking the pawn here. And how do I proceed? Check on d1, king to h2. Fortunately for John, he had moved his pawn to h3 at some time when he wanted to avoid me going to g4. And now this square, this move helps him from backrank mate. And my rook goes to d2. I want to exchange rooks. But John does not like it. Rook goes to b3, but now I have a free pawn. Not only that, I have a choice. Which of the pawns? a2 or f2? And since f2 was near the king, and since if I took a2, he could protect much easier the f2 pawn. And also, why not create an isolated pawn on e4? I take the pawn on f2. We completed 30 moves, and now I'm ahead by 3.9. That becomes significant. Meaning from now on, unless I make huge mistakes, the game should be minor. But let's see what happened. Rook goes to g3, and John threatens the pawn on g6. My king goes h7 to protect it. And John places his rook on g5. And here, as I was thinking and thinking, I have a 384 advantage, as you see here. What I needed to do is find a way to protect my pawn. There are more than one ways to do it. The rook can go to d6, f6, or to g8, as you see here. These are the top three options for the black player. And then, believe it or not, I saw a ghost, what is called, meaning I reacted to a non-existing threat. I was scared about my bishop on b7, and so instead of moving my rook from d8 to d6, I should have done, where did I place it? d7, giving more protection to my bishop when he didn't need it. And that's exactly what John liked, because his rook goes to, takes a pawn, and not only takes a pawn, you may think, okay, so what? I had a piece for a pawn. Okay, yes, a little bit less ahead. Computer says I'm ahead by 21 now, still not so much like before, but it's important. The problem is that John might be able to checkmate me with one of his rooks is on g3. If only he could place the other one on h4 or h5, it is mate. I better be very, very careful. And this after the disappointment of losing the pawn that I shouldn't have lost. I had to take control of myself, of my emotions, play as if nothing had started, don't get frustrated from the mistake I made, and see, first of all, how to avoid the mate, because if I can avoid the mating attack, basically John has nothing else. That is his biggest threat. Not exactly. If I'm not careful, for example, let's assume I place my rook from d7 to d6 will be lost, but let's assume I place it to d5 to attack the pawn, then good night to my bishop, because rook goes to g7 check, and although it's not mate, I lose my bishop. So I had to be careful both to avoid the checkmate and to make sure I don't lose the bishop on b7, because if I lose it, for example, a way like that, even if I get a pawn, we're talking about ending with the same material and no advantage for me. And the rook's, especially in the 7th rank, is very important. What do I do? My rook goes to f4. Now my other rook attacks the pawn without my bishop being in danger. Make it a little bit tougher for John to checkmate, but not impossible. And John threatens the checkmate. That's what I said, not impossible. He has one move. Rook goes from g6 to g5. And threatens going to h5. If it goes to h5, it's mate automatically. If I use my d7 rook to protect it, for example, by sending to d6, I lose my bishop. See, the 5th move according to the computer. So my only hope I thought at that moment, but the computer found 4 moves to keep me safe, and not that difference in evaluation, but I played the one the computer thought the best. My rook goes from f4 to f6. So if John checks, my rook covers a check. But I had to be almost one move away from mate, in spite of me having extra material. Had to be extremely careful. I reached a point where one mistake on my side could be fatal. I didn't need many mistakes, as I thought before. Just one more mistake, it would be fatal. And John, with less material, would checkmate me. But this did not happen, at least not now. Let's see what John is doing. Pawn goes to e5, attacks my rook. Of course, my rook cannot leave the 6th rank if it goes any other square from f8 to f1. Yes, the rook is safe, but we have checkmate. It had to stay on the 6th rank. Once again, I was one move away from disaster, even though the computer doesn't like the move. And now my rook, I felt, has only 2 squares to go if it wants to be safe and avoid mate, either e6 or h6. Computer prefers h6, as you know, but as you see here, but there's a small difference from e6. Myself, I placed on e6 to avoid the pawn going to e6 and attacking my rook on d7. So I sent my rook to e6. And we completed 35 moves. And although I barely avoided checkmate and I'm ahead by a bishop for a pawn, I'm ahead 3.13 says the computer. I did not feel that way at the time. I was feeling as if I was barely avoiding mate, and I had to be extremely accurate to win that game. But let's see what happened. John sends extra protection to his pawn on e5 because that was his hope. If he could promote that, things would be great for him. Computer doesn't like it. Computer would rather have him go to c3. Because if he does so, I cannot start pushing the pawn. And pushing the pawn, that's what I wanted, because now my bishop on b7 finally from bad becomes a good bishop. Otherwise, it would still be a good bishop, but I would have lost the pawn. So finally, not only here, I can also push it to c4, have it near promotion. Now it is a passed pawn. It is a nice passed pawn. And John decides, okay, Harry, you are pushing your past C pawn. I'm going to push my past pawns. I have three of them. The E, the G, and the H. The E, of course, is blocked, but let's push the G pawn, going to G4. And I continue. My C pawn goes to C4. I would rather have my B pawn move, but I felt it safer if I push it here. And I have a wonderful pawn chain, A6, B5, C4, protected by the bishop on B7. They say when there's a pawn chain and you want to attack the base. But even the base at A6 is already defended twice, both by my bishop B7 and my rook on E6. Let's see. John wants to block my b pawn from advancing, so sends his pawn to A3, and also the pawn now is defended by the rook on E3. But this gives me the if I can get this does not give me the chance. I could have checked before, but if I did it before, I would have won the pawn. But now at least I'm checking from the 2 check. And John has to decide where do he place his king. It can either be on the first rank G1 or H1 or the third rank on G3. Sending it to the first rank has the problem that the king is blocked, cannot leave it, cannot participate in the game. That's why he decided to send it to G3. But now I can exchange the rook. So if I exchange the rook, I don't have to worry about the rooks on G and H file checkmating. I send it to D3. So if John decides to take my rook, I take back. In fact, the rook cannot leave the third rank due to the pin. Can only go to F3. If he decides to exchange, my pawn goes to D3. I'm not sure if he can promote because the king is in the so-called square and can take it. For me to put my rook on the D file protected, I need two moves because here the pawn will take my rook. So really, I was thinking a lot, is it safe? Would it be safe for me if we exchange rooks? Yes, it's nice when you're ahead in material to exchange, but if John could take my D3 pawn and he had good way chance to take it, I'm left without a passed pawn, while John has three passed pawns. Materially, the difference is much small. I have a bishop for 2 pawns. And but what I saw is that although it's not perfect, it was better than the alternatives. It would still give me nice position. I might find some way to defend the pawn. Perhaps I could even sacrifice my bishop goes to e4 to protect the pawn. King takes it and pawn goes e2 and e1. But John relieved me from these concerns because he sent his king to f2. Basically tell me, Harry, if you want to exchange rooks, it's now or never. If we don't exchange now, my rook escapes. But for me, that's exactly what I liked. Because now not only we exchange rooks, but the c4 pawn is safe. It's still in the same chain. So I take the rook. We completed 40 moves and I'm ahead by 4.1, says the computer. Of course, John will take it back. Now the margin becomes much larger. And yes, it's true that John has three passed pawns, e5, g4, and h3. But, and two of them are connected. Not only three, but two are also connected. As we approach the ending and less material becomes, the pawns are much more valuable due to the fact that they can promote. And let's see how the game continues. My bishop goes to g2 to attack the pawn on h3. Of course, I was concerned if I took it, let's assume I took it, and John checked. Would I lose my bishop? Unfortunately, no, because I would answer the check by covering with my rook. Otherwise, if I didn't have this move, then I should be very careful before taking the h3 pawn. But I attack it at least. And John saves it by pushing it. So now it's in a dark colored square. My bishop is light color. I cannot even take it. I cannot attack this pawn here on a5. Although the computer says I'm ahead by 4.15, it better be very careful. If I'm not careful, any of the 3 pawns can promote, and he doesn't need to promote all 3 of his pawns. If he can only promote 1 of his pawns before me, he could win that game. My rook goes to h6 to attack the pawn, and John needs to do something. There are not too many somethings he can do. Either put the rook here, and then we exchange pawns, and my king can win at least the h-pawns. And my bishop can stop the e-pawn, especially since the promotion square is a light color. Or otherwise, to do what he actually did. His pawn goes to h5. 2 pawns, the g4 protects h5. Computer doesn't like it, but what would you do in John's place? Rook goes to e6, blocking the e-pawn, at least making sure it doesn't advance. King goes to d4 to provide more protection, and John is in a very tricky situation because if he wants his king to hurt the pawns, he needs to push as much as possible. But should he move the king too much, then my c4 pawn can go down to promote, and not easy for John to be able somehow to relocate his rook from g5 to stop the pawn. Because this is the only way he can stop my c4 pawn if his king is from the 5th rank or higher. My rook goes to c6 now. Why? Rooks behind passed pawns. That's what the theory says. The best way to support them. And John better put his king on c3 to stop it with his king. Otherwise, if I push it, his king cannot take my pawn. But John played the move that the computer thinks is the fourth best, and when he played it, I felt lots of relief. Rook goes to g6. Why? Because once rooks are exchanged, first of all, the g pawns become doubled. I'm going to win the h5 will go now to g6. I win an extra pawn, and it's not going to be easy at all for him to be able to promote either the e5 or the g4 pawn. And immediately, without a second thought, in fact, I double checked. It took a second thought, yes, not exaggerate. Yes, of course, I get to think. Both of us had enough time in our clocks. No reason to lose the game while having time in my clock. After making sure that there were no surprises, exchange. And QTC is a great move. Well, not so difficult to see. I wouldn't call great moves the moves that are obvious. If you sacrifice your queen for a pawn, and this, or once I did it, in fact, for 2 pawns, and this proves to be your winning move, yes, this is a brilliant and so on, especially if there is no immediate checkmate, but a long-term advantage after 10 moves. But such an obvious move, okay. Of course, John will take it back. I had 6.36 at a 45 move. Pawn takes it back. King takes the pawn. Now I am ahead by a full bishop. Not only that, I have 1 point island with a wonderful pawn chain a6, b5, c4. They say attack the pawn bases at the pawn chain at the bases, meaning a6. But if the king goes to not only to b5, if it goes even to c4, then not only to b6, but if the king goes even here to c5, pawn goes c3, c2, c1, nobody can stop it. And my king is near to stop the e5 pawn. So he cannot attack the pawn chain. It is safe, assuming I don't blunder it myself. Blunder, I mean, if I move now my pawn to c3, of course, king can take it. That would be a blunder. While on the other side, the pawns E and G, my king is not far from them. What does John decide to do? He took literally the maxim that when there's a pawn chain and you want to attack the basis. So he goes to c5 to attack it. That's exactly what I wanted. Pawn goes to c3. Now the c pawn can be promoted, cannot be stopped. But I'm pushing c pawn. John will push his e pawn, goes to e6. Sorry, this will happen later. complete wrong move from the Scots. He deleted the move. John is going to, at this point, to send his king to d6. And now I'm sending my pawn to c2, ready for promotion. M8, you see here. From now on, if I play perfectly, I should make at most 8 moves. But John doesn't give up hope. His pawn goes to e6. Can he promote the e-pawn? I didn't think so, but better be careful. Now I win my queen. Wonderful. I'm the first one to promote, and the pawn cannot even promote. He has 2 moves to promote, M5 at this point. Pawn goes to e7. 1 square from queening. But I'm not going to allow it. Check from c6. After double checking that my bishop really is opposed the queen, I'm not going to lose my queen for nothing. King goes to e5. And at this moment, believe it or not, I had checkmate in one move that I missed. Queen goes to f6 is mate. But almost every move wins a game for me. So I sent my queen to d7 to stop the e7 pawn from promoting. That was my biggest fear, and computer says it is a miss, and clearly says queen to f6 is the best. But I was so scared about the e-pawn. Yes, I knew that I could stop it, but I was scared of me forgetting about it and failing to stop it. That was I was afraid. Not the pawn itself, but if I played wrong and allowed the pawn to promote. And John doesn't want to end the game without promoting his pawn. And he promotes a pawn with a check. And of course, I immediately grab the queen. Now he sends his king to f4, hoping perhaps for a stalemate. And I wanted to double check everything. Fortunately, the pawns that he has don't allow, don't make stalemate very easy, because even if the king had nowhere to go, at least the pawns could move, and then he would have a legal move. Queen goes to e4 check. M3 is the computer. King goes to g3. My king goes to g5 to minimize his option. King goes to f2. I win the pawn now. A little bit scaring because now there is only the a3 pawn to stop the stalemate. King goes to g1. And now, computer says I'm 2 moves away from checkmate. I didn't know it. All I knew is be very careful. Don't let the stalemate. Of course, there was no chance John could win it from here, but he could get a draw by stalemate, or even a repetition if I'm not careful. So what do? My queen goes to g3. And believe it or not, that would have been a stalemate were it not for the pawn. Without the a3 pawn, this would have ended in a draw. But I knew he had the pawn, so he played the only move that he's allowed to play. Pawn goes to a4. And now my queen goes to e1 in a checkmate. So I defeated John Thomas Flippen in 57 moves. John, first of all, he's a very nice person, and also I like his courage because he participates in a club where most of the members are stronger than him, and he still insists on playing. Still try to learn after the game. He asked me what should he have done better. According to computers, you saw it. The only blunder he made is when he gave me the bishop for a pawn. But what I told him and what I think is true is that this is not a bad idea because my king is in danger. But if you are going to follow this route, I told him, and I'm telling the viewers now, is don't exchange queens. If you sacrifice material for a strong attack, don't exchange. Do your best to avoid exchanges. I think that the moves that gave me the game is when, first of all, when he exchanged queens, and then when he exchanged rooks. Until then, Who knows? And of course, the fact that I was able to see the checkmate threat and stop it. I was on a few occasions very near from disaster, and I had to really be on high alert to avoid it. But let's see, what does the computer have to say. So this means that, of course, I started the Winter Swiss Tournament of the Queen's Chess Club with one loss and one win. Let's see the review of the computer. What does he think? It thinks that John had 81.8 percentage. I had 91.7. That is very good, especially for a game that goes that long. Usually you can get even 100% if you catch your opponent in an opening trap and you finish the game in 10 moves. Yes, you do what the theory says for the first 10 moves. Your opponent messes up somewhere and you get 100%. But here, for a game that went 57 moves, to have 91.7 accuracy, I think it's very good. And ratings. John played as if his rating was 2250, almost three times, more than 2.5 times his actual rating. I played as if I was almost a grandmaster, 2450. That's why I don't trust these ratings too much. Too much flattering, and I have no idea why. Let's see the categories now. No brilliancies. And now the review gives one great move for John, zero for me, even though during the game he gave me a few great moves. Book 8 for John, 7 for me, best 30 for me, meaning more than half of the moves. And if you added the 7 of the book, we have almost two-thirds of the moves are the best possible, versus 12 for John. Excellent, 14 John, 9 me, good 10 John, and 6 me. Inaccuracies, John made 6, I made 4. Mistakes, John made 1 mistake. Blunder, 1 blunder. It is when no, I had one miss, but I think the only miss I had was the checkmate took a little bit longer. I missed the chance of checkmating one, so I wouldn't even call this really a disaster. And blunder one, maybe when he gave me his bishop, although I thought that he had a great potential if he would not exchange the queens. This concludes the second round. Something else to give a look at this point is how are the various tournaments going. Tournaments will be following. Tournament directory. Where are we? The one I'm trying to host now, the grecochess 64, I'm waiting 64 players to start. Until now, we have 6 of them are registered. In the current ones, I'm participating in many of them, but the most exciting ones, I would say, is the annual 2026 Chess.com Daily Chess Championship, where I have made the second round, but it's near the end of the first round. 25 games remain, and due to the format, there are no vacations, and you have to play a move in one day. It is advancing quite fast. And let's see the other tournament, the Moonlight Underwater. Underwater Moonlight, the Nine Moons Tournament. We're in the semi-final round, round number 3, with 12 players remaining. And you see that in Group 1, 7.5 for Mebius versus 5.5 for Chinan Fu and 3.5 for Bien Carvalans. Other than Iraq Lion that decided to time out all of the games, the other 5 players have at least some chance to advance. In group number 2, Maxim Govorukha has won 7 out of 7, and I think he's guaranteed to advance because only one player, PG74, can pass him, so even a second he could advance. Imam MMT with 60 seconds, he's almost sure, not completely sure, because Two players can pass him. Pg74 follows with 5 points. And these two groups are advancing, and we'll follow them as they go on. Well, that's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you everybody for watching. Thanks to the subscribers. If you have not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Thanks to the viewers, to the comments. What are we planning ahead? If you've seen the previous video, I reached the 1500 rating in the bullet. This was my goal. I set immediately when I reached 1800 for the blitz. I showed one game of the bullet that helped me advance. There are a few more games I want to show, the last few winning ones. Other than that, what is ahead? The chess bots. We were playing against the 1700. I defeated Arthur from Wales when I had the white pieces, although it took me 2 attempts. And now I'm going to face Arthur with the black pieces. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thanks all of you. Goodbye.